There is a kind of love that speaks through silence. A love that withdraws when it longs to move closer. A love that appears cold on the surface, yet underneath carries storms of emotion that few people ever witness. Many people who develop avoidant patterns are misunderstood. They are often labeled as distant, uncaring, or emotionally unavailable. But the truth is far more complex. Behind their emotional walls exists a hidden world, filled with fears, desires, regrets, and unspoken feelings. The tragedy is not that avoidants do not feel. The tragedy is that they often feel too deeply and have learned, usually from early experiences, that expressing those feelings is dangerous. So they hide, they retreat, they convince themselves that distance is safer than vulnerability. Yet silence always leaves clues. Today, we will explore what avoidants secretly feel, but rarely admit, even to themselves. And as we move through these hidden emotions, you may begin to understand why someone who seems distant may actually be struggling with feelings they do not know how to express. Because sometimes the loudest emotions are the ones that are never spoken. One of the deepest conflicts within an avoidant person is the simultaneous desire to be loved and the fear of being truly seen. On the surface, they may appear independent, self-sufficient, and emotionally detached. They often present themselves as people who need very little from others, preferring to solve problems alone and maintain a certain emotional distance. Yet beneath this carefully constructed exterior lies a profound longing for connection, a longing that is often hidden even from themselves. The roots of this fear usually begin early in life. Many avoidant individuals learned, consciously or unconsciously, that expressing emotions did not lead to comfort, understanding, or safety. Perhaps vulnerability was ignored, criticized, or met with inconsistency. Over time, they adapted by suppressing emotional needs and convincing themselves that depending on others was dangerous. Independence became more than a personality trait. It became a survival strategy. As adults, this strategy continues to shape their relationships. In the beginning of a connection, avoidants often feel comfortable because emotional expectations remain low. They can enjoy companionship, attraction, and shared experiences without feeling exposed. But as intimacy deepens, something shifts internally. The relationship begins to move beyond surface interactions, and with that comes a growing sense of unease. When someone starts to know them deeply, their fears, insecurities, wounds, and unmet needs, the avoidant may begin to feel vulnerable in ways they cannot easily tolerate. Instead of experiencing closeness as purely comforting, they may experience it as threatening. A voice deep within asks, "What if this person sees who I really am and decides I am not enough?" This fear is rarely spoken aloud, yet it quietly influences their behavior. Ironically, the more genuine the connection becomes, the stronger their defenses may grow. They may become less communicative, create emotional distance, focus excessively on a partner's flaws, or suddenly insist on needing more space. To the other person, these actions can seem confusing, or even cruel. But from the avoidance perspective, distance often feels safer than risking rejection. There is another paradox hidden within this pattern. Avoidants frequently long for someone who will understand them completely. Yet when such understanding begins to emerge, they instinctively retreat. Being fully known means surrendering control, and surrendering control feels dangerous when trust has historically led to disappointment or pain. As a result, many avoidants live with a persistent tension. They crave intimacy while fearing its consequences. They want love, but they fear exposure. They want acceptance, yet struggle to believe they will receive it. And so they stand at the doorway of deep connection, longing to enter, while simultaneously fearing what might happen if they do. One of the most misunderstood aspects of avoidant behavior is the belief that distance means indifference. When an avoidant person withdraws, becomes less communicative, or suddenly asks for space, many people assume that their feelings have faded or disappeared entirely. Yet in many cases, the opposite is true. Emotional distance is often not a sign that they no longer care. It is a sign that their emotions have become so intense that they no longer know how to manage them. For an avoidant individual, closeness can create an internal conflict that is difficult to explain. On one hand, they genuinely desire connection, affection, and intimacy. On the other hand, deep emotional closeness can awaken old fears of dependency, loss of freedom, rejection, or emotional pain. As a relationship grows more meaningful, these fears often become stronger. What feels natural and comforting to one person may feel overwhelming to someone with avoidant patterns. This is why avoidants sometimes begin to retreat precisely when the relationship appears to be going well. A partner may notice that everything seemed perfect only days earlier, and then suddenly the avoidant becomes distant, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. The sudden shift can feel confusing and deeply painful. However, this withdrawal is often less about the other person and more about the avoidant's internal struggle. Many avoidants experience intense emotions, but have learned throughout their lives to suppress or disconnect from those feelings. They may not possess the emotional tools necessary to process vulnerability in healthy ways. Instead of openly expressing fear, uncertainty, or emotional overwhelm, they instinctively create distance. Space becomes their method of regaining emotional equilibrium. During these periods of withdrawal, avoidants are not always emotionally detached. In fact, they may be thinking constantly about the relationship. They may replay conversations, question their own feelings, or wrestle with conflicting desires. Part of them longs to move closer, while another part insists that distance is necessary for self-protection. This inner battle can be exhausting. The tragedy is that avoidants rarely communicate what is happening inside them. They may simply say they are busy, need time alone, or avoid discussing their emotions altogether. Because they struggle to articulate their internal experience, partners are often left to interpret silence on their own, frequently concluding that they are unloved or unwanted. Yet emotional distance often conceals a deeper truth. For many avoidants, withdrawal is not the absence of feeling, but the presence of feelings that seem too powerful, too unfamiliar, or too risky to express. Their silence is often not empty. It is filled with fear, confusion, longing, and the ongoing effort to protect themselves from vulnerabilities they have never fully learned to trust. One of the greatest misconceptions about avoidant individuals is that once they create distance, they simply move on without looking back. Because they often appear calm, composed, and unaffected on the surface, others may assume that they rarely experience longing or emotional pain. Yet beneath this outward appearance, many avoidants carry feelings they seldom reveal. In fact, after creating distance, they often miss the people they care about far more deeply than anyone realizes. The difference is not in whether they feel loss, but in how they respond to it. While some people seek comfort through closeness, conversation, or emotional expression, avoidants frequently turn inward. They process emotions privately, often in complete silence. Rather than reaching out, they retreat further into themselves, convincing themselves that maintaining distance is the safest choice. When the noise of everyday life fades, memories often begin to surface. Small moments that once seemed ordinary suddenly take on new significance. A familiar song, a shared place, a particular phrase, or even a quiet evening can awaken powerful emotions. Avoidants may find themselves remembering conversations, laughter, and moments of genuine connection. They may wonder how the other person is doing, whether they are happy, or if they still think about them. Yet despite these feelings, reaching out can feel extraordinarily difficult. For many avoidants, initiating contact requires a level of emotional vulnerability that it feels deeply uncomfortable. Contact means risking rejection, exposing unresolved feelings, or admitting that the relationship mattered more than they allowed themselves to show. To someone who has spent years protecting themselves through emotional self-reliance, such vulnerability can feel overwhelming. Pride often becomes another barrier. Having withdrawn or created distance, they may fear appearing inconsistent or weak by returning. They may tell themselves that too much time has passed, that the other person has already moved on, or that reconnecting would only reopen old wounds. These thoughts can keep them trapped in silence, even when they desperately want to bridge the gap. There is also an internal conflict that many avoidants experience. One part of them longs for closeness and reconciliation, while another part insists that emotional distance remains necessary for self-protection. This creates a painful cycle. The more they miss someone, the more vulnerable they feel, and the more vulnerable they feel, the stronger their instinct to retreat becomes. As a result, many avoidants grieve relationships quietly and invisibly. Others may never witness their sadness because it is hidden beneath routines, work, distractions, or apparent indifference. But absence does not erase attachment. Distance does not automatically remove love. Often, behind the silence of an avoidant person exists a heart still wrestling with memories, longing, and emotions they struggle to express, even to themselves. Many avoidants carry a hidden burden that few people ever see: guilt, because they often struggle to express emotions openly. Others may assume that they move through relationships without remorse or self-reflection. Their silence can easily be mistaken for emotional indifference. Yet beneath that silence, many avoidants are acutely aware of the pain their behavior has caused. They often recognize, sometimes with painful clarity, that they have hurt people they genuinely cared about. The difficulty is that awareness does not automatically translate into action. An avoidant person may deeply regret withdrawing, becoming emotionally unavailable, or ending a relationship abruptly, but expressing that regret can feel incredibly difficult. For someone who has learned to protect themselves through emotional distance, admitting guilt requires vulnerability. It means acknowledging mistakes, confronting painful emotions, and risking further rejection. As a result, many avoidants carry their regrets privately, rather than speaking them aloud. Long after a conversation has ended, or a relationship has changed, avoidants often revisit important moments in their minds. They replay arguments, unanswered messages, missed opportunities, and moments when they chose distance instead of honesty. They may think about things they should have said, affection they failed to express, or support they were unable to provide when it was needed most. These memories can return unexpectedly, sometimes months or even years later. What makes this experience especially painful is that avoidants frequently hold themselves to impossibly high standards. Although they may appear detached externally, internally they can be surprisingly self-critical. They may judge themselves harshly for not being able to maintain intimacy, communicate effectively, or respond to emotional needs in the way they wished they could. The gap between what they feel and what they are capable of expressing often becomes a source of deep frustration. Shame also plays a significant role. Guilt says, "I made a mistake." Shame says, "There is something wrong with me." Many avoidants do not simply regret specific actions. They begin to question their own ability to love and sustain relationships. They may quietly wonder whether they are fundamentally incapable of giving others what they need. These fears can become so overwhelming that, instead of apologizing or reconnecting, they withdraw even further. This creates a tragic paradox. The very guilt that could motivate repair often becomes the reason they remain silent. They fear that an apology will come too late, that their words will not be believed, or that reopening communication will only cause additional pain. Consequently, they may choose silence, hoping time will soften the damage, even while carrying unresolved regret within themselves. For many avoidants, the deepest wounds are not always those inflicted by others. Sometimes, they are the wounds created by realizing they pushed away people they truly loved, not because they did not care, but because they did not yet know how to remain close when love became real. Beneath the distance, the silence, and the carefully guarded independence that so often characterize avoidant individuals, lies a profound and deeply human desire. The desire to feel safe in love. Despite appearances, Most avoidants are not running from love itself. They are running from the vulnerability, uncertainty, and potential pain that love can awaken within them. At the core of their emotional world is not an absence of longing, but a longing that has become entangled with fear. For many avoidants, early experiences shape the belief that emotional closeness comes at a cost. They may have learned that expressing needs led to disappointment, that vulnerability was ignored, or that depending on others resulted in pain. Over time, these experiences can create a deep association between intimacy and danger. As adults, they often carry these unconscious expectations into relationships, even when they desperately want something different. This is why love can feel so confusing for them. A healthy relationship may offer affection, consistency, and genuine care, yet these very qualities can trigger discomfort. Being loved means being seen. It means becoming emotionally dependent to some degree. It means trusting another person with parts of themselves that they have spent years protecting. For someone who has learned to rely primarily on themselves, this level of openness can feel both beautiful and terrifying. Yet despite these fears, avoidants often dream of a relationship where they can finally put down their defenses. Deep within them is the hope that someone might accept them without judgment, respect their need for space without abandoning them, and remain emotionally steady even when they struggle to express themselves. They long for a connection in which they do not have to choose between intimacy and self-protection. Safety, for an avoidant, is not simply the absence of conflict. It is the experience of knowing that vulnerability will not be punished. It is discovering that expressing emotions does not automatically lead to criticism, rejection, or loss of independence. It is learning that closeness does not require the sacrifice of one's identity. These realizations often unfold slowly, through repeated experiences of trust, consistency, and emotional reliability. Healing rarely happens all at once. Avoidants often move toward intimacy gradually, taking small and sometimes hesitant steps. There may be moments of progress followed by periods of retreat. Old fears can resurface unexpectedly, especially during times of stress or increased emotional closeness. However, when a relationship provides patience, understanding, and emotional safety, something remarkable can begin to happen. The walls that once seemed permanent may slowly soften. Feelings that were once hidden may begin to emerge. The avoidant, who once believed that distance was the only path to safety, may gradually discover a new possibility. That genuine love does not imprison, consume, or destroy, but instead creates a space where both connection and individuality can coexist. In the end, avoidants are not emotionless. They often feel deeply, love deeply, and struggle deeply. But much of their emotional world remains hidden behind silence and distance. Their withdrawal is rarely a lack of care. More often, it is a reflection of fears they have never fully learned to overcome. Understanding this does not excuse hurtful behavior, but it does reveal the humanity beneath it. And perhaps the greatest truth is this: when fear is met with genuine safety, patience, and self-awareness, even the most guarded heart can learn to love openly. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own experiences with love, distance, and emotional vulnerability. Have you ever loved someone who struggled to express their feelings, or perhaps recognized these patterns within yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden depths of human psychology, relationships, and self-discovery, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel,